It's Valentine's Day, which means one thing. It's Madam Web release day.
Boo this man!
Of course, I'm just kidding. I'm going to be subjecting myself to that torture tomorrow. But hey, Valentine's Day is the perfect time for a little masochism, if you ask me. And of course, it's what Dakota Johnson would want after all.
I know that when you see Madam Web, you're gonna love it. In fact, I think you're gonna see it twice.
In the spirit of the holiday, I thought it would be fun to do a tier list of superhero couples. Now, I'm not going to do every superhero couple, obviously, because then this video would be like 17 hours long. And I'm also not going to delve too deep into the history of each couple as well. I'll just do a little hit on the couple, my thoughts, and then the ranking, because again, I don't want this video to be so long that it can't be uploaded onto YouTube. And y'all know me, when I get into the history of superhero characters, I can opine a little bit and get a little long. So I'm going to try to keep the bits on the couples as short as possible. And I also added a few fun little alternative couples as well, which you'll understand that I'll explain a little bit later once we get to the first one. And as always, before we get started, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel for more comic book and pop culture talk. And let's get into the tier list. Now, the first one on the list is obviously going to be Clark Kent, Superman, and Lois Lane. Now, this is one of the, if not the oldest, at least of the popular comic book characters anyway, oldest relationships in comic books, and the most timeless and classic, in my opinion. Everybody knows Lois and Clark. You don't really have to, if you ask anybody about a superhero relationship, they'll probably either say Lois and Clark or Peter and Mary Jane. Those are probably the two most classic in comic books. And I usually go on a diatribe when I talk about Superman because he's one of my favorite characters. And anytime somebody says Superman is just the big blue Boy Scout, I automatically know, once that phrase leaves their lips, that they've never actually read a Superman comic. They're a classic couple, they're a timeless couple. Don't really have to go to too much depth about them. They are S tier. The next couple on the list is Batman and Catwoman. They're also a pretty classic couple, and they're actually the second oldest couple, at least on this list anyway, and of the most popular superhero couples. They're not as a classic as a relationship as Lois and Clark, but it is an interesting dynamic because she is a villain. I don't know if you can call her a villain anymore. She's more of an anti-hero now, really. She kind of started off as a villain, but now she's more of an anti-hero as she's developed that relationship with Bruce Wayne, Selena Kyle. But like I said, it is an interesting dynamic. They're not as classic as Superman and Lois, but they are recognizable. And so I will give them A tier. Next up, we have probably the second most recognizable relationship after Lois and Clark. It is Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and Mary Jane. Now, it's not as old as Lois and Clark or Bruce and Selena, but it, like I said, is one of the most recognizable outside of Lois and Clark, and maybe the most popular. It might even be more popular than Lois and Clark. I don't know. I am putting up a poll for what who people think the best superhero relationship is. The poll is not up as of the recording of this video, but it will be up as the posting of this video, so y'all can kind of go there to my community tab page and see what people think, and you can vote on it yourself as well. So that'll be interesting to see who people think the best superhero couple is. But for Peter Parker and Mary Jane, they do, even though it is such a recognizable and classic relationship, it is probably the one filled with the most trauma and the most drama as well. They've broken up and gotten together so many times. There was the whole storyline where he gave up Aunt May's life to, or Mary Jane's life to save Aunt May, which everybody hated. There's been so many times when she's either died or been on the brink of death, and he had to save her. He's gone to different dimensions, like in the most recent story with Paul, which I hated. If you go back to the early days of the channel, you know that. It made me stop reading Amazing Spider-Man comics because I hate the Zeb Wells writing so much. But there's all that stuff with Paul and her maybe having kids with him, but they were actually not real. But regardless, it's one of the most drama and trauma-filled relationships in comics, but that just comes naturally with being related to Peter Parker. He's probably the superhero with the most trauma in comic books. But there's also what kind of takes away from this relationship, in my opinion, is the fact that he met Mary Jane first, but then Gwen Stacy came along, and Gwen Stacy was probably better for him, but then she ended up dying, and she's been dead for like 40 years. So she stayed dead, which is rare in comics. And then along the way, in like the late 80s and the 90s, he started developing a relationship with Felicia, Black Cat as well, Felicia Hardy. So, and he's also had little relationships here and there, but ultimately he always goes back to Mary Jane. So that kind of him kind of being with other people kind of takes away from it for me a little bit, but it is still classic and recognizable. So we'll put Peter Parker and Mary Jane, in my opinion, just behind Lois and Clark. In that same vein, we have Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. I mentioned it earlier. He met Mary Jane first, but she wasn't really into him. And so, she was kind of a model and kind of be trying to become famous. So then after that, a little bit after that, he met Gwen Stacy. And Gwen Stacy, in my opinion, is probably better for Peter, but unfortunately, of course, she died in the very famous "The Death of Gwen Stacy" arc at the hands of Green Goblin, and when he tried to save her, obviously everybody knows that scene. They redid it in the Amazing Spider-Man movie with Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, which I think that Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone probably have the best on-screen chemistry of any couple in a movie. They really made it believable that they loved each other and felt for each other, and especially compared to no shots at Sam Raimi, but I never really believed that love that that Peter and Mary Jane had in that movie. Even though I really love the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, I just the relationship dynamic wasn't as convincing as Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's is in the Amazing Spider-Man movies. But yeah, Gwen Stacy, like I said, she's probably better for him, but she is dead, and she's been dead for like 40 something years. So unfortunately, because of that, even though I think she is a good partner for him, they're not together, obviously. So I will put them at A tier behind Batman and Catwoman. And the last of Peter Parker's most recognizable relationships is Peter Parker and Black Cat. Like I said, Felicia Hardy, she kind of got into more prominence in his life in the late 80s and the 90s. That's when she really started getting popular in the 90s. And this is the fun hot couple that's more friends with benefits than an actual loving relationship. Despite both of them caring for each other. Felicia, she's more into Spider-Man and the superhero side of Peter Parker than she is the actual day-to-day Peter Parker. But again, it's fun and it's hot, but it's not the best for Peter Parker long term. So I'm going to put Felicia, Black Cat, and Peter Parker in the B tier. Next, we have Gambit and Rogue. Now, Gambit and Rogue are kind of the other side of the fun hot couple. This is the fun hot couple, which usually doesn't work long term, but it ends up working long term. They found a way to make it work and keep it hot and fun for the most part. I'm a big fan of Gambit and Rogue. I have been for a while. They have a really cool dynamic in the comics, and I would love to see them done justice one day in live action. Rogue in the early X-Men movies was okay, but she wasn't that great. And then also, obviously, we have never seen Gambit. They were supposed to do that Channing Tatum as Gambit movie forever and ever. Maybe we'll see a cameo of Channing Tatum in Deadpool 3. I think as a little joke they might do that. But I can't wait for the day when we get the actual X-Men in the MCU, and they do a proper Gambit and Rogue relationship, because I think that's probably going to be a fan favorite. And for me, Gambit and Rogue are S tier, and I actually have them. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm putting them after. I was thinking about putting them before Peter Parker and Mary Jane, but I can't do that. I'll put them just after Peter Parker and Mary Jane. Next up, we have one of the newer relationships in comic books that is Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. Now, this came about after Harley Quinn left Joker, which that was an F tier relationship. That was a toxic and abusive relationship. I think it was a long time for them to split up, even though they're classic together. It was not a good relationship. But Harley left Joker and she went to be with Poison Ivy, Pamela. And Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn are, on the other hand, on the opposite side of her and Joker. They're fun, they're chaotic, but in a good way, and they really care for one another. And if you watch the Harley Quinn animated show on HBO Max, which is hilarious, I really like the dynamic they have on that as well. And so for this, Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, for me, I have it actually as an S tier relationship above Batman and Catwoman. Ooh. Next up, we have the mom and dad of Marvel's first family. That is Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, and Sue Storm, Invisible Woman. Now, this one's a bit biased because I'm not the biggest fan of the Fantastic Four. Now, I don't dislike the Fantastic Four. I just don't read them a lot because I've never been interested in them. They've always just seemed kind of mid to me in the comics, even though, and now that might be a little blasphemous. Again, I'm a primarily DC fan, so the Marvel comics I do read are more of the, I guess Fantastic Four is a bigger title, I guess, but more like the Avengers and Spider-Man. I never really got into the Fantastic Four that much. I do have a few Fantastic Four books in my collection, though. But anyway, because I'm not as interested in the Fantastic Four as characters, Reed and Sue, they're kind of mid to me. But maybe that's because I don't read them that much, and also because in memes and popular media, they always show, Reed is always getting memed and joked about being cucked uh, by Sue and Namor. There's always those memes and jokes about Sue having Namor on the side. So that kind of takes away from the relationship as me. And this might be blasphemous, especially to some big Marvel fans, but I actually have Sue and Reed at a C tier. Yikes. Sorry for the Marvel fans, but they're kind of mid to me. Next, we have Scott Summers and Jean Grey. Now, that's obviously Cyclops and Jean Grey. Scott and Jean, they're a pretty popular comic book couple, but a lot like Sue and Reed, they've never been particularly interesting to me. I don't know why. I don't know, Scott is just boring to me. Maybe like I said, I need to read more. I do like the X-Men. I need to read more of Scott. I don't well, even the stuff I've read of Scott, I don't know. I've just never been interested in Scott as a character. I'm more interested in the thruple that usually develops when Wolverine is added to the mix. I think that's a more interesting dynamic, that thruple and that love triangle that they have, than Scott and Jean themselves. So for me, but it's not as bad for me as Sue and Reed. So I will put Scott and Jean at a B tier, and I do have them above Felicia and Peter Parker because I think they are a good couple. And they're definitely a better couple than Felicia and Peter Parker. But I do, if you add Wolverine to the mix and make it a thruple, then it's A tier for me for the drama. The next one on our list is one that a lot of people who aren't super into comics might not know. It is Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. Now, this might actually be the most stable and mature relationship in comic books, at least in Marvel Comics anyway. They have a kid together, they're able to maintain their relationship, being married, and as well as being superheroes. And being loving parents, they kind of are able to juggle all that, even though they have a chaotic superhero life. They're able to still be loving parents to their kid, and they're still able to love each other really well, which is very rare in the comic book world. So to me, because of that, I give them S tier, and I will put Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. I will have them. I'll them before Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, just because of that because they're married and that parental relationship that they're able to keep despite being superheroes. Next up, we're gonna get into the player himself, Dick Grayson, which probably isn't, a help to his relationships. But I have, obviously, Dick Grayson's relationships are a point of contention if you're a comic book fan, especially if you're a DC fan. And it depends on how you got into comic books. OG comic book fans are usually partial to Dick and Barbara because that was Dick's first relationship all the way back to his days as Robin when he was with Batman and Batgirl was introduced in 1961. Now, fans of Marv Wolfman's, acclaimed New Teen Titans series or the early 2000s Cartoon Network show Teen Titans, fans of those two things who got into comics that way, which is how I got into comics, are usually fans of Dick and Corey, or Starfire, as she's more well known, because that was the prominent relationship in the Marv Wolfman series and also in the Cartoon Network show. Like I said, I got into comics through the animated shows in the 90s and early 2000s, and then later on I got into, Teen Titans is one of my favorites. I got into the Marv Wolfman Teen Titans series, so I am more of a fan of Corey and Dick, but I do recognize that Barbara, or as she's better well known, Batgirl and then Oracle, Barbara Gordon is probably better for Nightwing Dick Grayson, but I'm more of a fan of Starfire and Dick Grayson. So for Barbara Gordon and Dick Grayson, I have them at a A tier, and I have them after Peter and Gwen. And then for Starfire and Dick Grayson, I have them at a B tier, but I do have them before Scott and Jean because I do still think they're a good couple, and they're my personal favorite of Dick's relationships. Now, a relationship that Dick had that is not as well known was with Raven. Now, this happened in New Teen Titans Volume 2 in Marv Wolfman's New Teen Titans series. Issue number 39. Raven, basically, the story is Raven got these new empathic powers, and she wasn't able to process her emotions because she never had emotions before, really. So she got these empathic powers, like she has in the Cartoon Network show, where she could feel other people's emotions and decipher them. She didn't understand emotions, and it led her to believing that she was in love with Dick, and then she got jealous of Corey, Starfire, and so because Dick cared so much for Corey, she wanted him to care that much for her as well. So she kind of subconsciously, she didn't do it on purpose. Although she kind of speaks like she did, it's supposedly the emotions that were taking control of her actions. That's what the explanation is, anyway. Even though it kind of seems like she was manipulating him on purpose, but subconsciously or not, she kind of emotionally manipulates him and she also plants dreams in his head of them being in a relationship, and which leads to him falling in love with her. I put that in quotation marks because he didn't really. He was emotionally manipulated, and they end up sharing a kiss. But then they end up realizing what's happening to Raven, and nothing really comes of this relationship. But despite it being emotional manipulation and really toxic and not a good situation, I kind of like Dick and Raven together. I think maybe that might be clouded a little bit because of how he took care of her in the Trigon arc in the Cartoon Network show. But he was more of a brother to her in that, like kind of like a protector to her in that. But I did like how he kind of protected her and took care of her, and I think that that could translate into the comics as well. I think that's and that honestly, Dick and Raven might be his most stable relationship if they did get together. But it's not a real relationship. This is one of the the alternative for fun couples that I mentioned I had on the list before. So it's just for fun. But I have it at a low B tier. And speaking of fun relationships, next up we have Barry Allen, The Flash, and Iris West. Now, this is one of the more fun and positive relationships in comics. Despite all the struggle and stuff they've been through, they managed to be so supportive of each other. And I think if you've watched the CW Flash show, which you probably have, I thought they did a really good job of displaying the dynamic that Barry and Alan have in that show, even though that show does have some weak points, especially towards the latter seasons. And you know, the whole "We Are the Flash" thing was kind of dumb. But despite the weak points of the show, I thought that the way that they showed the dynamic of Barry Allen and Iris West was pretty close to how they are in the comics. I really love Barry Allen and Iris, and I have Barry and Iris at an S tier, and I have them before Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, and just after Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. Next up, we have The Vision and Scarlet Witch, or WandaVision, as they called them in the Disney Plus series. Now, Wanda and Vision, they're a good couple on paper, but they're very sad and very heartbreaking in practice. I do like them together, but I don't know if they should be together just because of all the mess that they go through. It's really sad. I have them at a B tier, and I have them just before Felicia and Peter Parker. Next, we have a couple that's not very well known if you're not a big comic book reader or DC fan, but it is one of the strongest in comics, in my opinion. That is Mr. Miracle, Scott Free, and Big Barda. This is a really great relationship. They've been through so much tough stuff due to their connection to the Fourth World lore with New Genesis and Apocalypse and the New Gods and Darkseid. You know, they have the whole dynamic with them, and it's really tough and really rough times that they go through because of their ties to Darkseid and Apocalypse and Granny Goodness and all that. But they're always able to make it through, and they always have each other's back no matter what. They have such a loving, caring relationship for each other, and also the way Tom King portrayed them in his Mr. Miracle miniseries is top notch. If you haven't read Tom King's Mr. Miracle, go out and find it right now or after this video, because I think it's one of my favorite miniseries. It's 12 issues, so I don't know. Does that count as a miniseries? Whatever you call that. It's one of my favorite miniseries of all time. Definitely in my top 5 of miniseries. It's a really great. Mr. Miracle is a really great series by Tom King, and I really love the relationship that Scott Free and Big Barda have together. So for Scott Free, Mr. Miracle, and Big Barda, I have them as an A tier, and I actually have them just after Gambit and Rogue. Next up, we have Invincible, Mark Grayson, and Adam Eve. Now, this one is interesting because most people probably only know the animated version of these two. You know, the Amazon show, which is supposed to be coming in March, which is such a long wait. It ended last winter, and now it's not coming till March. But either way, most people probably only know that version of the show. But in the comics, they actually have a kid together, and they got married, and they have a pretty good relationship despite going through a few hurdles, which I won't say here because they're spoilers that are going to happen in the show. I guess them having a kid is probably a spoiler, but I mean, it's I don't know. I don't think that's really a spoiler. The stuff they go through is more the spoiler than them actually getting married and having a kid. But another way that is different from the show is that or that the comics are different from the show is that Amber in the comics is kind of like a ditzy fling for him, but in the show she's actually more of a well fleshed out character. So I'm interested to see if in the Amazon show he's going to end up with Amber, who's more of a fleshed out character now, or if they're going to get him with Adam Eve and go with that storyline. But as for Adam, Eve, and Invincible's relationship in the comics, I have them at a B tier, and I have them after after Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon. Next up, we have Daredevil and Elektra. Now, this is another one of those fun hot couples, but unlike Gambit and Rogue, it is not really that great of a relationship. It's hot but very chaotic. They go through a lot of different on and off. You know, they're on and off and again relationship that you probably know that you have friends that do that. It's like I said, it's a hot relationship, but it's is not the greatest. So for Daredevil and Elektra, I have them at a B tier, and I have them. I will put them after. Vision and Scarlet Witch. Next up is another one of the fun and alternative couples that I have on the list. This is Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy, but not in the comics, in the Spider-Verse movies. The Spider-Verse version of them. Now, they differ from the comics and the movies because Miles and Gwen's relationship in the comics is kind of uncertain and weird. It's almost like Miles is Gwen Stacy's side piece. Like she doesn't really, she's not really into him, but she kind of is. He's she's kind of like, he's kind of her side piece in the comics. But in the movies, on the other hand, in the Spider-Verse movies, I think that they have a really great dynamic together, even though they're not officially in a relationship. I think that maybe by the end of the Spider-Verse movie series, they probably will have them together. If they don't, it's going to be a travesty because they have great chemistry together. They have a great dynamic. I think they're really sweet together. So for not in the comics, but again the Spider Verse version, I have them at an A tier, and I have them just after Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon. Next up, we have Hawkman and Hawkgirl. Now, this is a relationship that you would think I would have higher because they're literally tied together, as they always are able to find each other when they die and they're reincarnated. They always find their way back to each other, which seems like a pretty, a pretty nice love story. But I don't know, they've always been kind of mid to me, and I think that my feelings towards Hawkman and Hawkgirl are kind of clouded by the fact that I am more of a fan of the Justice League animated series version of Hawkgirl, where she gets into a relationship with John Stewart's Green Lantern. So this one might be a little biased, but I have Hawkman and Hawkgirl at a C tier just after Sue and Reed. Which again, the Sue and Reed one might be a little biased as well. But speaking of John Stewart and Hawk Girl, that is another one of the fun alternative couples that I have on the list. The animated version, the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated versions of Hawk Girl and John Stewart's Green Lantern, they're the OTP for me. They're the, which, if you don't know what that means, is the one true pairing. They had such a natural progression from disliking each other to being work colleagues to being friends to developing feelings, and they don't actually go all the way in the show. If I remember correctly, they do share a kiss and they do share their feelings with each other, but I don't think they actually get together in the show as an official couple. But in comics that are related to the Justice League animated universe, they do later show that they did finally end up together and actually have a kid after John Stewart's relationship with Vixen ended in her death, in her unfortunate death. He does later end up getting with Hawkgirl and John Stewart in those comics, so it is canon. And so Hawkgirl and John Stewart in the animated series, I have them at an S tier, and I put them after Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. Next up, we have a relationship that a lot of you might not know if you're not deep into comic book lore or reading. That is Apollo and Midnighter. Now, this is going to become a much more mainstream relationship, for better or for worse. Because if you don't know, James Gunn is introducing the Authority into his new DC universe, and they're going to be in the Superman Legacy movie. And Apollo and Midnighter are kind of the leaders, or really they're kind of the face of the Authority. Apollo and Midnighter. Apollo is basically he was the Wildstorm universe's version of Superman, and then Midnighter was the Wildstorm universe's version of Batman. They were kind of parodies at first, but then they later developed them into actual characters, and they got into a relationship, and they got married in that universe. And then, so they were one of the first prominent gay couples in comic books. And then DC bought the Wildstorm universe and put them over into the actual DC universe. So now they're one of the more prominent gay couples in DC Comics. So that's why I say that this is going to become mainstream, for better or for worse, because I know that there are a lot of people that have issues with that, with seeing those relationships in movies, which, screw those people. But they also adopted a troubled superpowered child as well after they got married, which puts gives them bonus points in my book because they stepped up to become parents even though they didn't have to take care of this kid. They did. She was a member of the team, and so for Apollo and Midnighter, I have them at an A tier, and I have them just before Barbara and Dick. Next up, we have Green Arrow, Ollie, and Black Canary, Dinah. Now, this is another one of the older relationships in comics because they first paired up together in the 60s. Now, I like Black Canary as a character, and I like Green Arrow as a character a lot. And they are a classic couple, but together, I don't know, they just never have done it for me. I do like his nickname, his pet name that he has for her, Pretty Bird. It's one of the more classic pet names for a loved one in comic books. It's right up there with Superman and Lois, their pet names. But Green Arrow did cheat on her once in the comics, and they do kind of have a kind of a rocky back and forth. And like I said, I don't know. I like Black Canary as a character, and I like Green Arrow as a character. But together, I've just never been the biggest fan of them, even though they are a classic couple. So for Green Arrow and Black Canary, I have them at a low B tier, and I actually have it behind the fictional. Actually, no, that's not a real relationship. So I'll put them behind Felicia and Spider Man. Speaking of Spider Man, we have another one of the alternative couples that's just for fun. If you're not familiar, in Ms. Marvel number 34, Carol asks Peter for a favor, and in turn, Peter asks her out on a date. So Carol agrees, and they go on their date in Ms. Marvel issue number 47. Now, of course, Peter is broke as he always is. Peter Parker never has money. So Carol Danvers pays for the date. She was Miss Marvel at the time. Obviously, this was in the Miss Marvel comics. So she pays for the date and she dubs him the girl of the date, which I thought was really funny. And then they go on to find it hard to talk about anything on their date other than superhero stuff. Then they get attacked by some people looking for Carol Danvers. And then they do end up having a really sweet moment on top of a building eating chili dogs. And then, so that was really a really fun moment. And then later on in a one shot, Ms. Marvel, Carol Danvers, gets taken over with a symbiote, and the symbiote tells Peter that she actually did really have real feelings for him, which he brings up in a joke later on, and she says, "Don't push it." And she kind of shoves it out to the side, but she doesn't disagree that she had feelings. So Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, might have feelings for Peter Parker, but they never explore it outside of that and outside of making a joke of it, even though they did go on that date. So for the fun, for fun relationship of Peter Parker and Carol Danvers, I think it has potential if somebody wanted to explore it. But for now, since it didn't really go anywhere other than just a date, I have it at B tier, and I will put it after Ollie and Dinah. Next, we have Hulkling and Wiccan. Now, this is another newer couple that is going to become mainstream, for better or for worse, knowledge pretty soon because they're probably going to do Hulkling and Wiccan at some point. People are suspecting at least Wiccan because of his connection to Wanda, obviously, and then Hulkling probably because of the Young Avengers connection. But and Hulkling is also not connected to the Hulk, even though he's called Hulkling. It is kind of confusing. But this is another newer couple that I actually don't read a lot of comics with them in it. Like I said, I'm not the biggest Marvel fan, so a lot of the comics with them in it, I'm not super into. They're more for the younger audiences. But from what I do know of them, my tertiary knowledge of them, they do seem to be a pretty caring and supportive couple of each other. So I will put Hulkling and Wiccan at B tier, and I will put them after Mark Grayson and Adam Eve. Sorry, I think I said that I put Hulkling and Wiccan at B tier. I meant to put them at low A tier, not B tier. But the next couple we have is Tony Stark and Emma Frost. Now, this one is another one that I've just put in there for fun. It's the most recent on the list, and because they just got married last year in a big comic event towards the end of the year. Now, this one is it was purely a marriage of convenience, a business partnership. But I really actually do like the dynamic that Tony and Emma Frost have for each other. They are pretty similar, so it's probably not going to work out long term, especially since they don't seem to really maybe love each other. I think they care about each other, but I don't know if they have like a deep love for each other. um, but it is a fun dynamic, and I think that they could work out long term, but they're probably not going to because they're just because they're on so opposites of, Tony's a hero, she's a villain. I think you could make it work, like how Selena and Bruce ended up being made to work, and I actually think it would be a cool relationship and dynamic to explore in with Tony and Emma, to have arcs for them, to grow their characters. But they're probably not going to do that. I don't think Marvel editorial wants to keep them together long term. I think they would be a good couple long term, but I don't think Marvel editorial, like I said, is going to do that. So for Tony and Emma, I have them at a B tier, and I have them just after Ollie and Dinah. Next up, we have Aquaman and Mera. Now, this is another one of the older relationships in comics, but it's been tainted, unfortunately, by all the mess that happened with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard and that whole trial. Amber Heard, she obviously played the live action Mera in the movies. And it's a shame because I really like Mera's character in the comics. Atlantean magic has always been interesting to me, especially the way it's portrayed in the animated shows like the Young Justice show, and even in the first Aquaman movie, I thought they did a really good job showing the Atlantean magic. But it's unfortunate that anytime anybody thinks about Mera, they're probably gonna think about Amber Heard and think about poop on the bed. So I like Mera as a character, and I do like Aquaman and Mera together. So despite all that, I have them at a B tier, and I have them just before Vision and Wanda. And the last couple on the list that I have for today is Black Bolt and Medusa. Now, the Inhumans as a whole, much like the Fantastic Four, the Inhumans have kind of just been mid to me. They've been whatever. So, but I do think that Black Bolt and Medusa are interesting, and they do have an interesting dynamic, and they do have a good relationship. But the Inhuman as a whole have never really been interesting to me. This is one of the ones that I need to read more of, that I haven't read a lot of. But from what I do know of Black Bolt and Medusa, they do seem to have a pretty good relationship, and it's an interesting dynamic in the fact that he can't talk. So it's interesting how they go about their relationship, I think. So I have Black Bolt and Medusa at a B tier, and I have them just before Tony and Emma. And that is going to do it for today's video. Like I said, there's a few couples I left off the list, like Cap and Peggy. You might say, where are they? Well, in the comics, Cap and Peggy weren't in a relationship for very long. He's actually been in a relationship with Sharon Carter way longer than he has Peggy Carter. Also, I left off Colossus and Kitty Pryde. That's another more popular relationship, but I left it off because they kind of had a rocky relationship, and it's kind of weird because they met when he was 18 and she was 13, and then they wanted to get married, but then she left at the altar, and then he kind of treated her bad. He cheated on her, so they kind of have like a weird relationship. And I also left, Storm and Black Panther is another big one that I left off the list just because they didn't end up working out, and they're not together currently. But let me know down in the comments below what your favorite superhero relationship is, and if I left any off the list, let me know what it is. Make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more comic book and pop culture talk, and I will see y'all another day.